Is this thing on? Is this thing on? Wow, it's been a long time. I feel like since I've been back on Joe Patrick on football. But welcome back, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast. I apologize for us being out of commission here for a couple weeks. We've had some things going on, both personally and at work, that has just stopped me from being able to. But very happy to do it today because there's so much to catch up on. Obviously, with the Falcons and all of their contingent up in Indianapolis for the NFL Combine, and it's not the combine necessarily that I'm interested in, but obviously the media appearances and what Ian Cunningham has been saying, what Kevin Stefanski's been saying up there. There's been a lot of media that they've done, both with local media, national media, the Falcons' own team website. So lots of stuff to dig into there. We're not going to actually do a lot of that in this episode today. A lot of that conversation will take place with friend of the show, Mark Zinno, who's going to join me on the next episode, which will come out likely later this week, if not next week, but I will be recording with him in just a little bit. So I know that that's going to be getting done. But what I really want to talk about today, and what has centered around a lot of the conversation that's happened up in Indianapolis, is whether Michael Penix is the quarterback one for this team. And one of the reasons I wanted to bring Zeno on for a conversation again that will happen in another episode is because I feel like he was getting a lot of crap from a lot of fans when he asked Ian Cunningham, or I don't know if the question was addressed to Cunningham or Matt Ryan. I believe it was actually addressed to Matt Ryan in Ian Cunningham's press conference about the status of Michael Penix and whether he was going to be the starting quarterback once he was healthy. Then there was a lot of controversy when Mark Raimondi for ESPN reported after that press conference that the Falcons basically did not kind of back Michael Penix, which I thought was an accurate statement in the way that they presented it, because what they said at the time was that they were just focused on his rehab, that they liked Mike, that they complimented him on what he does well, said that he needed to improve in some aspects, which they did not really detail, but then said that they couldn't really talk about it anymore. One, in that press conference, because Kevin Stefanski is the head coach, and they weren't going to get ahead of the head coach. And also that they just need to see him get healthy first before they can really talk about that. Well, obviously, with the combine happening and Kevin Stefanski being up there, he was able to be asked about Michael Penix's status. And I thought it was interesting what he had to say. Actually, it kind of speaks volumes to me, where he's asked about him, and he says, quote, "I'm not big on giving out positions in February. I think you guys know how I feel about Michael, and I'm excited about his trajectory. I also know he's focused on his rehab, which is the right thing to do." He also had a quote, "Like I told you guys, Mike is working very hard at attacking his rehab, which is the most important thing he can do right now. We will work through all those things." And when it comes to all the quotes that Ian Cunningham had to say about Michael Penix yesterday, on Tuesday, up in Indianapolis, he's where he should be as it relates to his knee injury. Feel like he's doing a good job coming in every day and doing what he needs to do. We're confident he's on the right track, again, as it relates to his rehab. Another quote, "We got a chance to talk a little bit, and I told him we're trying to find you more teammates." Obviously, with them being at the combine. And then one last quote, "I am looking forward to getting to know him a little bit more and see how he does with his rehab." So again, like, all these quotes are kind of centered around Penix getting healthy, which is true. He has to get healthy, but those quotes to me do not scream like we can't wait to get him back and get him working with this group and we think he's going to be exciting. Now, I think that there's message discipline in that, in them not getting out over their skis. I actually credit the team a lot with, and it specifically goes down to the people who are speaking: Kevin Stefanski, Matt Ryan, Ian Cunningham. They know the right things to say. They're not, and I feel like it's totally in contrast to the previous tenure that was really embodied by Raheem Morris, who felt like he just was getting up on a soapbox when he was talking to media and really supporting his guys, loving his team, loving his whole organization, all the people in the building. But were those always, all that love, was it actually a true reflection of how the team was thinking, how he was thinking about a given player's spot on a roster, or the job that a certain person was doing, whether that's a player or a coach? I think that there was just a lot of just like false niceties that would get thrown around. And I would say the same thing for Terry Fontenot. They would, it was just a lot of um kind of self-hype. I know that sounds a little bit over the top, like self-congratulate, but that's just how it felt. It was always like this feel-good, positive reinforcement to themselves almost in the media. And obviously, I think that that's kind of where a lot of this feeling of being oversold and underdelivered on kind of stems from, which is some of this. So I give the Falcons a lot of credit for the way that they've talked about this. But I think that it leads to some truths that are coming out, which is that they just don't really know exactly where Michael Penix really fits into the picture at this given time, given his injury. And I really encourage. There was a viral video that was going around, kind of besmirching Penix and his ability to throw downfield. I think it was like a video of a compilation of all of his 20+ yard attempts or something from last year, and I think that the video kind of was a little misleading. I'm kind of clipping it, and fans were taking certain aspects of it and going around. But the one clip, the one play that I think is like really worth making a note of is actually the first clip in that compilation, which is the only rep that Michael Penix had all season last year, under center with a play action passing attempt. It was only one time. It happened, I believe, in the second quarter of the Tampa Bay game, in the opening game of the season, and they never did it again. And in my opinion, when you watch that video, you can tell why. It looks like a high school level, like play action play, and I say that largely due to Pennix, and like the footwork on the drop back looks totally incorrect. Now, I'm not a football coach. I've never played quarterback. I've never coached quarterback, even at the high school level. I know really nothing about quarterback other than seeing lots of quarterbacks play, and you can tell that is not how the footwork is supposed to go on that particular drop back. And the reason why I think it's worth pointing that out is because that's a perfect example of, especially in Kevin Stefanski's system, where he's going to need to improve, but he can't do that right now. All he can do is rehab his knee, squats, and it's great to hear that he's doing squats. He's maybe further ahead than maybe they would have expected at this point in time, but he's still not going to be able to practice again at full speed, or even practice speed, when these guys are just in helmets, when they're getting together over the summer and then in OTAs. Having those reps of getting under center and doing some of those play action concepts, and the one that he did was like a duo concept in the play action pass that looked ridiculous that I just described. That's probably one of the easier types of play action dropbacks, as opposed to trying to have that play action on like a wide zone concept where you really got to sprint out to the side and to get there for that action before you half boot around. And it's not that I don't think that Michael Penix can do those things, but it's clearly going to take work. And I think that that's what Kevin Stefanski and Cunningham, Matt Ryan are all seeing from him as well, which is that he has to work some of those things out. But that's where this physical injury really takes a toll on his career and his Falcons tenure at this point, because he's just stuck. Like, he can't really make that progress that otherwise he would be making. And I think that it really affects the timeline for how the Falcons feel like they can build their organization going forward, because the quarterback is such a huge part of it. If he were healthy and able to kind of get on the practice field, not right now because the CBA and all that prevents it, but if the Falcons brass were able to see a better picture over the course of this offseason of what he looks like, and make improvements and see some of those improvements, then I think things could be totally different. But I think with where he is right now is why we've seen this explosive story that came out from Jason La Confora, where he's talking about the Falcons quarterback situation and Michael Penix specifically, and some of the quotes that he has in this story that he's attributing to anonymous people outside of the Falcons organization, but clearly people who have heard something. And I don't think that La Confora, for however much of a grain of salt you want to take the story with, and I do think you should take it with somewhat of a grain of salt, it's just a grain, like, I don't think he's making up these quotes. That's like season 5 of The Wire type stuff. That would just be ridiculous. And so let's get into some of these quotes. And again, this is in Jason La Confora's article, but this is a quote in the article according to sources. It's not going to be just a warm body, veteran minimum type guy. I can promise you that. This is a source talking about Atlanta's pursuit of a quarterback and kind of what the solution looks like for them at that position as they go forward this offseason, which is interesting considering Ian Cunningham hasn't been on the job that long. And you wonder whether, these other GMs, these other sources around the league that La Confora is quoting, heard this since Ian Cunningham joined on, or potentially even before. The quotes go on. There are some definite concerns there about Pennix taking the next step on several levels. It's been a lot worse than people really know. One general manager who expects to be very active pursuing quarterbacks himself said, quote, Atlanta's looking for a starting quarterback. I know that much. We are definitely looking at them as competition. I think they're going to be in on everything. It's not good there with Pennix. So they've clearly heard some things, and I think that it generally lines up with what we've heard the Falcons say, which is, I think, first of all, a lot of times these quotes can kind of get, like they're not going to have the carefulness of how they talk about the Falcons organization if they're not part of it. The Falcons are obviously going to be a lot more careful, but I think you can take what the Falcons have said through Matt Ryan and Kevin Stefanski and these anonymous quotes and find a core truth there with this, where the team is with Michael Penix right now. And so, if the Falcons are in on a starting quarterback, if they're potentially looking to, I don't think that they're, and by the way, despite those quotes and what was said, I don't think that even those people would say that they're like moving on. They're already in the state of mind where they're moving on from Michael Penix. I think that they would say that, they just feel like the Falcons need to be serious, and they are acting serious about where the quarterback situation is for them right now, because it's literally the quarterback room right now. After they said that, Ian Cunningham stated, with certainty that Kirk Cousins would be released on March 11th and they would not be re-signing him, so we can consider him out of the picture. There's one quarterback in that room. It's Michael Penix. He can't play right now. They don't have another one on the roster. So, obviously they have to go in, and that's where, for a lot of Falcons fans, they say, okay, well, we're going to look for a quarterback. Who's out there? We got Daniel Jones coming off a season-long injury, Aaron Rodgers, Russell Wilson, Marcus Mariota, Zach Wilson. Dear God, help me now. Like, I don't see a starting quarterback here, and the Falcons only have 5 draft picks. It's not like it's going to be very easy for them to go out to the market and try to trade for a quarterback that perhaps is a backup. Mac Jones has obviously been floated around in that respect. And so a lot of people will read through this list of names and say there's no one there. I think there is one there. And I'm not talking about Joe Flacco. Joe Flacco may be the one where people would say, because the obvious connections of him playing for Stefanski in recent seasons and playing pretty well, getting them to the playoffs in one year, for that to be a possible solution. I think it's a possible solution. But the quarterback, and I will credit Mark Zenones, one of the reasons I want to have him on for our next show, is he was the one where we were texting about this, and he sent me back a link, and he said, "This is the guy, Jimmy Garoppolo." And the more I've looked into it, the more I've thought about it, I think that this is a quarterback that Matt Ryan, given the quarterbacks that are available right now, like obviously Jimmy Garoppolo is not a quarterback who, if the world was your oyster and you could just go sign anybody, you're not going for Jimmy Garoppolo. That's pretty obvious. But with the quarterbacks that are out there, who is the best option for the Falcons? And I think that Jimmy Garoppolo is a guy that fits the bill. And it was actually a little bit surprising to me when I went through and actually looked at some of his just basic stats, but I'm just kind of looking at his Wikipedia page and his stat line, and it's not as bad as I would have expected, especially if you look at just like his win-loss total. I think, and obviously he played for the 49ers, who had some good defenses. But I mean, in 2019, he came off of an ACL tear in 2018 and went 13-3 with that 49ers team. And anyway, his entire career record is 43-21. That's pretty good. That is pretty good. So he's got a 43-21 overall winning record, or overall record. The only seasons in which he's had a losing record in games in which he's played was 2024. He had one start with the Rams. They went 0-1. And 2018 with the San Francisco 49ers, he played the last 3 games of the season and went 1-2. Those are the only 2 seasons in which he's had a losing record. He's had several 500 records in his career. His last year before he got benched in Las Vegas, he was 3-3 before he was replaced by Aiden McConnell. In his 6 starts, he was also 3-3 in 2020 with San Francisco. That was an injury-plagued year. And then he's had winning records in all the other seasons that he's played, including, again, that 13-3 record that he had in 2019. He's had some interception issues, which is definitely a big problem. But he knows the system. He's also a guy that would fit in with what Kevin Stefanski wants to do in terms of being under center, doing the play action thing. Hasn't always been a quarterback that's been like a super high high output guy in terms of the attempts. Like he's, think he's a quarterback that you feel comfortable with, you kind of hope that he, only has to pass it in the, low 20s amount of attempts, low to mid 20s, and you can get by with a good running game, and you kind of rely on Garoppolo, frankly, to do the things that Michael Penix really struggles with, which is the quick passing, making our layups. Like these are the kinds of phrases and words that Matt Ryan has used in the past, and I think that he is a guy that can potentially do that. Now, what are the risks with Jimmy Garoppolo? First of all, the other positives, I don't think he would be super expensive. And I think that the Falcons might be looking at something more than a 1 year deal that could entice them to, or that could entice Garoppolo to sign with them for maybe a little bit more added security. If everybody else is only offering 1 year, I could see the Falcons saying, we'll actually do 2 years with you. That would basically take him through on the same timeline that Michael Penix's contract would be on. And then also, obviously, with a big quarterback draft class, you never know. It's hard to really say what's down the line for this team. I'm sure they would not love to be in position to draft a quarterback in the top 5 next year because of what that would mean for what their next season up ahead would mean. But yeah, I think it would make sense the Falcons could potentially offer a little bit more in terms of the contract length than other teams that could reduce that cap hit number for them. So the negative with Jimmy is the injury history, and it's really bad, and to the point where, like, even I'm not advocating that the Falcons sign. I never want to be an advocate for the Falcons doing this or that. I'm just trying to kind of parse out, like, what are the actual facts on the ground here as it relates to Garoppolo. And ultimately, I mean, he's had injuries all over the place. He's had a torn ACL. He's had back issues. He's broken his foot. He's had all sorts of different injuries. And that worries me. That to me is like obviously an injury prone player, but it feels like, I've said this, some people are just built differently. Literally, you're built differently. You have different bone densities. You have different tendon strengths. And I think that he may just be a guy who is much easier, much more likely to suffer an injury. Now, maybe that's, you're willing to take that risk if you're the Falcons because you have Michael Penix behind him. If something were to happen, you have a pretty good, somebody, frankly, you want to see. I think the Falcons want to see Michael Penix ultimately get reps. But then again, this conversation takes us back to that question that Mark Zeno asked in that press conference, which is Michael Penix your starting quarterback when he's healthy? And I don't think that, based on the reporting from La Confora, and if they are truly in the market for somebody who is a bona fide starter in the NFL, and by the way, Jimmy Garoppolo learned under Tom Brady, went to 2 Super Bowls with the Patriots, not playing, and then, led a team to a Super Bowl himself in 2019. I think he's proven himself, and despite kind of the reputation that he now has, a bit of a meme around the NFL, is just kind of like a failed starter. I think he is a guy that Matt Ryan would see and look at that background, look at, kind of who he's developed under and just all of the experiences that he's had, and said that he will be a starter for us, and he can be a starter in this league if he can remain healthy. And so if they're looking for that starter, it probably means that they don't anticipate Michael Penix being the starter as soon as he's healthy, and that's probably the right thing to do, both by the Falcons and Penix himself, by the way, if he's not capable of running Stefanski's offense the second he gets healthy. And it's not, I don't think anybody should expect that he would be able to. And I think it's one of the reasons why the Falcons don't want to be precise about when specifically Michael Penix would actually return to the field in a game, because I don't know that they know exactly how long it's going to take in practice for Michael Penix to understand the concepts of the offense, show Kevin Stefanski and the offensive staff that he's physically capable of doing the things that they need him to do. And that is going to take some muscle memory in and of itself, because it's going to be something likely very different than what he's done throughout the majority of his career. So I think the Falcons, they're not going to say this publicly because it expresses some, amount of uncertainty to the fan base. But I think the reality of the situation is that they just don't know exactly, while they want to praise and be complimentary of all Penix's tools, which are legitimate. They're not lying about that. He's got great arm talent, can throw the ball down the field. I don't think they really see him as a usable starting quarterback until he proves to them on the field that he can do some of these core concepts that Kevin Stefanski is going to ask of Jimmy Garoppolo or whoever else they sign, who will be the starter in week one, and likely into the season. By the way, it wasn't worth noting as I was just reading through Jimmy Garoppolo's Wikipedia page, kind of refreshing myself on his career. He suffered that an ACL tear in. Let me pull up his profile again. This was in 2017, I believe. It was his first year in San Francisco. He started the last 5 games, and then no, it was 2018. It was 2018. He tore his ACL in week 5 of the season, and then came back and led the 49ers to that great Super Bowl run in 2019. So a week 5 ACL tear, which is Michael Penix had an ACL tear in week 9. Jimmy Garoppolo was back for week 1. So, health wise and everything they've said about Michael Penix would suggest that, there is maybe the potential that he could not be back as the Falcons starting quarterback in week 1 on the field, but at least practicing and participating with the team out by then so that he can work himself into that starting contention as fast as possible. But this is going to be a developing story, and just like there are so many developing stories for the Falcons nowadays, I was thinking about it. It's like the Falcons right now are like it's like a Game of Thrones episode where you have all these like different storylines, and you're kind of bouncing around from like one world to the next, and it's like kind of like that with the Falcons. We talk about all the storylines this team has going on, whether it's the quarterback situation, you've got the James Pierce drama over here, you've got Kevin Stefanski, you've got a new GM who's looking to try to trade picks, all of things which we'll discuss. But then also you've got the Kyle Pitts situation going on, which we will now cut to before we get out of here for the day. And obviously big news with them announcing yesterday that they were applying the franchise tag to him. I think it's something that almost all of us expected. It's been bandied about in the media quite a bit. Now, what's been bandied about in the media quite a bit has not fully come to fruition, because I think myself and a lot of others had anticipated that something that could be on the cards for the Falcons, especially if they are looking to acquire picks, would be to franchise tag Kyle Pitts, but then to ultimately trade him. And I think there's potential for that to still be on the table. Now, the Falcons did signal right when this was happening that they wanted to franchise tag him and talk about working out a longer term extension. I think the Falcons are open to that. We've had that conversation here in the past where I think it's legit. I think the Falcons are within not just their rights, but their right mind, I guess, to consider something like that, because I think that Kyle Pitts came back and showed last year what he can do for a team on the field. But I think that he did show that in a way where it's like but he needs things to be centered around him a little bit in the offense, and don't know if he's going to be afforded that in this scheme. And so what Ian Cunningham had to say about it was interesting, which was basically along the lines of, we need more time to evaluate this player, to understand the landscape of, free agency, how tight ends are valued. Right now, it's not a heavy tight end class, and therefore Kyle Pitts still retains a lot of value around the league because he's very gettable, even though he's on a franchise tag. The franchise tag kind of, in some instances, this being one, means that he is still available. He's just going to cost a certain amount. By applying the franchise tag, that basically means the Falcons are going to recoup a certain amount of value, whether that's via trade or playing for them on the field, where that value is then returned. And I think that that's possible too. I think that it's very possible the Falcons could move forward with Kyle Pitts on the field, but I just wanted to stress that I don't think that this story is necessarily done, and I think that Ian Cunningham's quotes support that. I mean, it's the reason why I say I think there's a different world where Ian Cunningham says, we see Kyle as a core part of our offense and personnel and what we want to do with Kevin Stefanski, and we're going to, we wanted to apply the franchise tag now because we do need more time to work out a contract. But I think like there is a different world where potentially the GM is talking a lot more certain about getting a deal done. And the way that I hear Ian Cunningham talking in this situation is more of we're buying our time, and we will essentially see what happens on that front, where they will be they'll have to figure out a long-term extension by July. Otherwise, that it's not going to happen. And frankly, I think that a good portion of the kind of negotiating / evaluation again, not just an evaluation of Pitts the player, but an evaluation of his value as it relates to the NFL landscape. That's all going to take place over the course of the next month as free agency gets going. And as like teams start to make moves ahead of the draft and then potentially even after the draft. I think that this whole kind of player acquisition period that's about to happen in the NFL that will span, the course of a couple months or so, that's really the time where I think we're going to find out a lot more about Kyle Pitts' future. And I think that if he does stay with Atlanta through that period, I think that there's a good chance that he could, work out a longer term extension with the team. And whatever ends up happening will tell us a lot ultimately about how the Falcons truly feel about him and how much value he can provide for the team. But like I said, there's so many topics. We're going to touch on a lot more, and some of these with Mark Zeno. I know he's going to want to talk about the Pennix situation because I know that he was, he's been, on top of wanting to try to get to the bottom of this. I know a lot of fans won't take it very well too, because I think it's great that you support Michael Penix, and I certainly think that there's a ton of potential there for him. But also, this past season really kind of was a huge correction for me on him because of what we saw in those first few games. His rookie year, I thought were just outstanding. And yes, not perfect, but I thought that the big play value that he was going to be able to provide was going to paper over some of the layups that he misses, if we want to kind of keep with that narrative. And ultimately in 2024, he was not able to connect downfield and have those high value impact plays hardly at all. He had no explosive touchdown passes. That's the kind of thing you need to get out of Michael Penix. And maybe under a new system with some better disguised play action passing concepts, that can open up for him and they really can get the most out of him. But we're just at a point again in February where we don't know. Kevin Stefanski would say the same thing, I think. So thank you guys so much for listening again. We'll be back with Mark Zeno for the next episode. Until then, take care.